The photograph had been tucked beneath a false bottom in his grandfather's old trunk, yellow with age and curled at the edges, showing a young woman with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets even through the faded sepia tones. Tucker Donovan pressed his thumb against the worn surface, tracing the delicate curve of her jaw, wondering who she was, and why his grandfather had hidden her away like forbidden treasure in the year 1885. He sat back on his heels in the dusty attic of the ranch house outside Fort Bowie, Arizona, surrounded by the remnants of a life lived hard and long. His grandfather had passed 3 weeks ago, leaving Tucker the property and all its mysteries. The old man had never married, never spoken of any woman with particular fondness, yet here was proof that someone had mattered enough to keep her memory preserved in darkness for what must have been years. Tucker turned the photograph over. In faded ink, barely legible, were the words, "Victoria Sutherland, Tombstone, 1882. 3 years ago." His grandfather would have been 60 then, already weathered by decades of ranching and riding. The woman in the photograph looked no older than 25, her face luminous despite the primitive photography. She wore a high-necked dress with delicate lace, and her hair was swept up in a style that spoke of refinement, of a life lived far from cattle and dust. Tucker was 26 himself, hardened by the same land that had shaped his grandfather, though he liked to think he carried more gentleness in his heart than the old man ever had. His grandfather had been stern, distant, a man who showed affection through gruff nods and awkward pats on the shoulder. The idea that he had once cared enough about someone to keep their photograph hidden away seemed almost impossible. "Tucker, you still up there?" The voice of his ranch hand, Miguel, drifted up through the attic opening. "Yeah, just finishing up," Tucker called back, slipping the photograph carefully into his shirt pocket. Something about the woman's eyes kept pulling at him, kept making him wonder. What had happened between her and his grandfather? Why had they never married? Where was Victoria Sutherland now? He climbed down the ladder and found Miguel waiting with his hat in his hands. The older man had worked for Tucker's grandfather for 20 years, and had stayed on without question when Tucker inherited the ranch. "Find anything interesting up there?" Miguel asked. Tucker pulled out the photograph and showed it to him. Miguel's weathered face creased further as he squinted at the image, then his eyes widened slightly. "I know that face," Miguel said slowly. "Or I know of her anyway. Victoria Sutherland. She used to work in Tombstone, ran a dress shop there." This was before the big gunfight, before things got real crazy in that town. She had a reputation for being kind, helped a lot of families who could not afford much. "You know what connection she had to my grandfather?" Miguel shook his head. "Your grandfather never spoke of his past much, you know that. But I remember once, maybe 10 years back, he got a letter from Tombstone. He read it, then burned it in the fireplace. Did not say a word, but he looked like someone had punched him in the gut. Maybe it had something to do with her." Tucker stared at the photograph again. The woman looked directly at the camera, unsmiling but not severe. There was warmth there and intelligence and something else he could not quite name. Tombstone was not far, maybe 100 miles south. He could make the journey in a few days if he pushed hard. "You thinking what I think you are thinking?" Miguel asked with a knowing look. "The ranch can survive without me for a week or two," Tucker said. "You have managed things before." "That I have." "But Tucker, it has been 3 years since this photograph was taken. She might not even be in Tombstone anymore, might not be alive for that matter." "I know, but I have to try. Something about this does not sit right with me. My grandfather kept this hidden for a reason, and I need to know why." Miguel nodded slowly. "Your grandfather was a complicated man. Maybe you will find some peace in this, or maybe you will just find more questions. Either way, you are young enough to chase ghosts if you want to. Tucker prepared for the journey that evening, packing light but carefully. He took dried beef, hard tack, coffee, and enough water for the first leg of the trip. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Ranger, was reliable and even-tempered. The route to Tombstone would take him through rough country, past abandoned mining claims, and through territory where Apache warriors still occasionally clashed with settlers, though the worst of the fighting had died down in recent years. He left before dawn, the desert air still cool and forgiving. The sky lightened gradually from black to deep blue to the pale gold of early morning, and Tucker felt the familiar rhythm of the ride settle into his bones. Ranger moved with steady confidence beneath him, and the world opened up in that particular way it only did in the Arizona Territory, vast and unforgiving and beautiful in its harshness. By noon the heat was oppressive, and Tucker stopped to rest in the shade of a rocky outcropping. He pulled out the photograph again, studying it as he sipped warm water from his canteen. What had drawn his grandfather to this woman? Had it been love, real love, or something else? And why had they never married? The questions circled in his mind as he rode through the afternoon, past saguaro cacti standing like sentinels and creosote bushes, releasing their distinctive scent in the heat. He made camp that night near a dry wash, building a small fire and heating coffee that tasted like mud but helped keep him alert. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any town lights, and Tucker lay on his bedroll thinking about destiny and chance. He reached Tombstone 2 days later, riding into town as the sun climbed toward its zenith. The famous silver mining town had seen better days. The ore was playing out, and many of the businesses had closed or were struggling. Still, there was life here, people moving along the dusty streets, horses tied to hitching posts, the sound of a piano playing somewhere in the distance. Tucker tied Ranger outside a saloon and went inside, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dimness. The bartender, a heavy man with suspicious eyes, looked him over as he approached. "Whiskey," Tucker said, putting coins on the bar. "And information if you have got it." "Information costs more than whiskey," the bartender said, but he poured the drink anyway. "I am looking for a woman named Victoria Sutherland. She used to run a dress shop here." The bartender's expression shifted, became less guarded. "Victoria? Sure, I know her. Everyone in Tombstone knows her. Shop is 3 blocks down on the left side of the street. Big sign out front says Sutherland's Fine Dresses. She still runs it, her and her cousin." Tucker's heart kicked against his ribs. She was here. She was alive. He tossed back the whiskey, feeling it burn down his throat, and headed back out into the brilliant sunshine. The dress shop was exactly where the bartender had said it would be. A neat wooden building with whitewashed walls and lace curtains in the windows. The sign was hand-painted, elegant letters that matched the refinement he had seen in the photograph. Tucker stood outside for a long moment, suddenly uncertain. What was he going to say? He could not just walk in and announce that he had found her photograph in his dead grandfather's trunk. The door opened and a woman emerged, carrying a basket. She was not the woman from the photograph. This woman was older, perhaps 40, with graying hair and a practical manner about her. "Can I help you?" she asked, taking in his dusty clothes and the nervous way he held his hat. "I am looking for Victoria Sutherland," Tucker said. "Well, you found the right place. She is inside, working on a dress for the mayor's wife. You can go on in." Tucker stepped through the door into a world of fabric and color that seemed impossibly delicate after days in the desert. Bolts of cloth lined the walls, and a dress form stood near the window draped in emerald silk. At a table in the back, bent over her work with intense concentration, was the woman from the photograph, 3 years had only enhanced her beauty. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple knot, revealing the graceful line of her neck. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she stitched, and when she looked up at the sound of the door, Tucker found himself staring into the same eyes that had captivated him in the photograph. "Good afternoon," she said, setting down her needle. "Are you looking to have something made? Though I should warn you, we typically work on women's clothing, not men's." Her voice was warm, touched with humor, and Tucker found himself momentarily unable to speak. She was even more striking in person, with an intelligence and vitality that no photograph could capture. "I am Tucker Donovan," he finally managed. "I came from Fort Bowie. I found something that belongs to you, or at least has your name on it." He pulled out the photograph and laid it on the table between them. Victoria's face went very still, all the color draining from her cheeks. She picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "It was in my grandfather's trunk. He died a few weeks ago. I found it hidden under a false bottom, along with your name and this town written on the back." Victoria sat down heavily in her chair, still staring at the photograph. "Your grandfather, what was his name?" "Thomas Donovan. He had a ranch outside Fort Bowie." "Thomas." She said the name like a prayer, like a wound. Tears began to slip down her cheeks, and she made no move to wipe them away. "I wondered if he had kept it. I hoped he had, but I was never sure." Tucker pulled up a chair, sitting across from her. "Will you tell me what happened between you?" Victoria looked at him for a long moment, assessing. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. "It was 1882, like the date says. I had just opened this shop, was trying to make a life for myself after my parents died. Thomas came to Tombstone on business, something to do with cattle contracts. He came into my shop one day because he needed his shirt mended, and we started talking. He was older than me, yes, but he was kind in a way I had not expected from a rancher, gentle despite his rough exterior." She paused, touching the photograph gently. "We fell in love. It was that simple and that complicated. He would ride down from Fort Bowie every few weeks and we would spend time together. He asked me to marry him and I said yes. I was so happy, Tucker. I thought I had found everything I wanted." "What happened?" Tucker asked softly. "His family happened." "He had a sister back east, your great-aunt, I suppose. She wrote to him saying she was dying, begging him to come see her one last time and to bring his fiancée so she could meet the woman her brother was going to marry. So we planned the trip. Thomas bought the train tickets. We were going to leave the next week." Victoria's voice broke, and she had to pause to compose herself. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, a man came to my shop. He was from Fort Bowie, said he was a friend of Thomas's family. He told me that Thomas had a wife already back east, a woman he had married young and abandoned. He said Thomas was a liar and a cheat, and that if I went with him, I would be participating in bigamy. He showed me a marriage certificate, official-looking papers. I believed him. Tucker's gut tightened. But it was not true. I do not know. I never gave Thomas a chance to explain. When he came to Tombstone that week, excited about our trip, I told him I knew the truth and that I never wanted to see him again. He was devastated, kept saying he did not know what I was talking about, that there was no wife. But I would not listen. I was so hurt, so angry. I threw him out of my shop and told him if he ever came back, I would have the sheriff arrest him. Did he try to contact you again? He sent letters for months. I burned them all without reading them. Eventually, they stopped coming. I thought he had moved on, maybe found someone else. I tried to move on too, but I never could. No man ever measured up to what I had felt with Thomas, even believing he had lied to me." Tucker leaned forward. "My grandfather never married. He lived alone his whole life, died alone except for me and the ranch hands. If he had a wife somewhere, I never heard about it." Victoria's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that maybe that man lied to you. Maybe there never was another wife. Maybe someone wanted to keep you and my grandfather apart." "But why? Who would do that?" Tucker shook his head. "I do not know. But I know my grandfather well enough to know he was a hard man, a stern man, but he was not a liar. If he said there was no other wife, I believe him." Victoria stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Her shoulders shook, and Tucker realized she was crying in earnest now. He stood and approached her carefully, unsure if his presence was welcome. "I threw away the best thing that ever happened to me because I believed a stranger over the man I loved," she whispered. "Thomas spent his whole life alone because of my pride, my refusal to listen. Oh God, what have I done?" "You believed what anyone would have believed," Tucker said gently. "If someone showed me official papers and told me something like that, I would have questions too. But I did not even give him a chance to answer those questions. I just shut him out completely." She turned to face Tucker, her eyes red and devastated. "Did he ever speak of me?" Tucker thought about how to answer that. "Not to me directly, but Miguel, one of our hands, said he once got a letter from Tombstone that upset him badly. He burned it right after reading it. Maybe that was from you." "I never sent him any letters." "Then maybe it was from someone else, telling him you had moved on or married. We may never know the full truth." Victoria sank back into her chair, looking exhausted. "I have lived with regret for 3 years, but it was manageable because I thought Thomas had deceived me. Now you are telling me I might have been the one who destroyed everything, and I do not know how to carry that." Tucker sat down across from her again. "Or you could look at it another way. You could see this as a second chance." "A second chance? Thomas is dead, Tucker. I know. But you are not. And neither am I." The words hung in the air between them. Victoria looked at him with confusion, then slowly, understanding began to dawn in her eyes. "I am not my grandfather," Tucker continued, "but I am his blood. I have his ranch, his life in some ways. And from the moment I saw your photograph, I could not stop thinking about you. I told myself it was just curiosity, just a mystery to solve. But riding here, spending days with your image in my pocket, I think it was something more." "You do not even know me," Victoria said, but her voice was uncertain. "I know you loved my grandfather. I know you run a successful business in a hard town. I know you are kind, according to people who have known you. I know your eyes have haunted me since I found that photograph. Maybe that is not enough to build on, but maybe it is a start." Victoria stared at him, and Tucker could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear and hope, caution and desire, all tangled together. "This is insane," she finally said. "You are what, 25? 26? 26. And you are what, 28 now? 29. Still, you came here to solve a mystery, not to court the woman your grandfather loved. Maybe I came here for both. Maybe fate has a sense of irony, bringing me to you the way it brought him to you. I am not saying we get married tomorrow, Victoria. I am saying let me stay in town for a while. Let me get to know you. Let us see if what I am feeling has any foundation, or if it is just the romance of the situation." "And if it is just romance?" she asked. "Then I will go back to Fort Bowie, and you will go back to your dresses, and we will both have closure on a story that has haunted 2 families for too long." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, just a little. "You are as stubborn as he was, you know that. Thomas would never take no for an answer either." "Is that a yes?" "It is a maybe. Stay in Tombstone for a week. Come to dinner tomorrow night, meet my cousin properly. We will talk, we will see. But Tucker, I need you to understand something. I am not a young girl anymore. I have been hurt badly, and I have built walls to protect myself. You cannot just ride in here and expect me to fall into your arms because you have your grandfather's eyes and a romantic story." "I do not expect anything," Tucker said honestly. "I just want a chance." She nodded slowly. "1 week. We will see what happens in 1 week." Tucker found a room at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, a practical woman who asked no questions and provided clean sheets and decent food. That night, he lay in the unfamiliar bed and thought about the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he had been a simple rancher, concerned with cattle and water rights and the everyday struggles of keeping a ranch running in harsh territory. Now he was in Tombstone, pursuing a woman he barely knew because her photograph had stirred something in him he could not explain. He went to dinner the next night as invited, arriving at Victoria's house with a bottle of wine and nerves that surprised him. He had faced down rustlers and survived drought and dealt with all manner of hardship, but the prospect of sitting across a dinner table from Victoria made his hands shake. Her cousin, the woman he had met outside the shop, turned out to be named Margaret, and she was pleasant but clearly protective of Victoria. She asked Tucker pointed questions about his intentions and his means, and he answered honestly, explaining about the ranch and his grandfather and the strange compulsion that had brought him here. "It sounds like a dime novel," Margaret said, but she was smiling. "Victoria deserves something good, something beautiful. She has been sad for too long." "Margaret," Victoria protested, but there was no real heat in it. The dinner was simple but good, and afterward Victoria suggested they walk through town in the cooling evening air. Tombstone at night was alive with piano music and laughter from the saloons, but there were quieter streets, 2 residential areas where families lived and children played. "Tell me about the ranch," Victoria said as they walked. "What is it like living out there?" Tucker described Fort Bowie and the surrounding country, the endless sky and the way the desert transformed at sunrise and sunset. He told her about the challenges and the rewards, about Ranger and the other horses, about Miguel and the small crew that kept things running. "It sounds lonely," Victoria observed. "It can be. My grandfather seemed content with it, but I have always thought there should be more. A home, not just a ranch. Family, not just hired hands. You want children? Someday, yes, with the right woman. Do you?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I used to dream about it when Thomas and I were together. I imagined children running around, a house full of noise and life. After everything fell apart, I put those dreams away. They hurt too much to hold on to." "Maybe it is time to take them out again," Tucker said softly. She looked at him in the lamplight, her expression unreadable. "You are asking me to believe in something again, Tucker. That is not easy for someone who has been disappointed." "I know. I am not asking for easy. I am just asking for possible." Over the next several days, Tucker found reasons to be near the dress shop. He helped Victoria carry heavy bolts of fabric from the freight office. He fixed a broken window frame and rehung a door that had been sticking. In the evenings, they would walk and talk, sharing stories from their lives. Victoria told him about growing up in Tombstone, about learning the dress trade from her mother, about the challenges of running a business as a woman in a town that still valued traditional roles. Tucker told her about learning ranching from his grandfather, about the hard lessons and the occasional moments of connection. He told her about his parents, who had died when he was 12, leaving him to be raised by the stern old man who had never quite known what to do with a grieving boy. "It must have been hard, losing them so young," Victoria said. "It was. I think that is why my grandfather kept you hidden. The photograph, I mean. He had already lost so much. Losing you too must have broken something in him he could not repair. I wish I could apologize to him. I wish I could tell him I am sorry for not listening, for not giving him a chance to explain. You can tell me instead, Tucker said. Maybe that is part of why I am here. To receive the apology he never got and to pass along the love he never stopped feeling. Victoria stopped walking, turning to face him fully. Do you really believe that? That there is some cosmic purpose to you finding that photograph? I believe that some things happen for a reason. I believe that love does not die just because the people who feel it do. And I believe that you and I meeting like this under these circumstances means something. What does it mean? She asked, and her voice was barely above a whisper. It means I am falling in love with you, Tucker said. I know it has only been a few days. I know it sounds impossible. But from the moment I saw your photograph, something in me recognized something in you. And now, knowing you, talking with you, seeing the way you smile when you think I am not looking, I am sure of it. Tucker, Victoria breathed, and there were tears on her cheeks. I am scared. So am I. But I would rather be scared and try than safe and alone. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. You do have his eyes, Thomas's eyes, but you are gentler than he was, more open. Is that good or bad? It is wonderful, she said, and then she was kissing him, her lips soft and sure against his. Tucker pulled her closer, tasting salt from her tears and feeling something fundamental shift in his chest. This was right. This was what he had ridden through the desert to find, though he had not fully understood it until this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria laughed shakily. What am I doing? I barely know you. You know me well enough, Tucker said. And you have the rest of our lives to learn the rest. The rest of our lives. You are very confident, Mr. Donovan. When I know what I want, I do not see the point in pretending otherwise. I want you, Victoria. I want to build a life with you. I want to take you back to Fort Bowie and make that ranch into a real home. I want children with your eyes and your kindness. I want to spend every day earning the trust I am asking you to give me. Victoria pressed her forehead against his chest, her arms wrapped around him. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. Probably. Does that mean no? She pulled back and looked up at him, and in her eyes, Tucker saw the answer before she spoke it. It means yes. It means I am going to trust this feeling, trust you, and trust that maybe Thomas brought you to me in the only way he could. It means I am going to be brave one more time. Tucker kissed her again, deeper this time, pouring everything he felt into it. When they finally made their way back to Victoria's house, Margaret was waiting on the porch with a knowing smile. I take it the walk went well, she asked. I am going to marry him, Victoria announced, sounding surprised at herself. Margaret laughed. I could have told you that 3 days ago. You have been looking at him the way you used to look at Thomas, only more so. When are you planning this wedding? Soon, Tucker said, if Victoria agrees. There is no reason to wait. We have already lost 3 years to misunderstanding and distance. I do not want to lose any more time. Victoria nodded. Soon. But I need to close up the shop properly, find someone to take over or sell it. I cannot just abandon my customers. I can help with that, Margaret said. I have been working with you long enough to run things. Buy me out of the partnership, let me take over completely. You go start your new life without worrying about this one. Tucker spent the next week in a kind of euphoric haze, helping Victoria make arrangements and getting to know her more deeply. They talked about everything, from the mundane details of favorite foods and childhood memories to deeper questions about faith and family, and what they wanted their life together to look like. I want you to know, Victoria said one evening as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, that I am not going to be one of those wives who just stays home and tends house. I like working. I am good at it. Maybe I could start a small dressmaking business in Fort Bowie, something just for myself. I would never ask you to give up something you love, Tucker said. The ranch is big enough for both our dreams. They were married 2 weeks after Tucker had first walked into Victoria's shop in a simple ceremony at the church in Tombstone. Margaret stood up for Victoria, and Miguel, who had ridden down from Fort Bowie when he got Tucker's telegram, stood up for Tucker. The minister was a kind-faced man who seemed pleased to be marrying two people who were so obviously in love. "I never thought I would do this," Victoria whispered as they stood at the altar. "After Thomas, I thought this part of my life was over." "It is just beginning," Tucker whispered back. They spent their wedding night at the hotel in Tombstone, and Tucker was gentle and patient, knowing that Victoria's only other relationship had ended in heartbreak. She was hesitant at first, then eager, and by the time dawn light crept through the windows, they lay tangled together in a state of exhausted contentment. "I love you," Victoria said, tracing patterns on Tucker's chest. "I know I have not said it clearly before, but I do. I love you." "I love you too," Tucker said, kissing her forehead. "Always will." They left for Fort Bowie 3 days later, Victoria's belongings packed into a wagon driven by Miguel, while she and Tucker rode together on Ranger, Victoria seated in front of Tucker with his arms around her waist. It was a long journey, but Victoria did not complain about the heat or the dust. She seemed fascinated by everything, asking questions about the landscape and the plants and the occasional wildlife they spotted. "It is so different from Tombstone," she said. "More open somehow." "Wait until you see the ranch," Tucker said. "It sits in a valley with mountains all around. In the spring, there are wildflowers everywhere. You will love it." When they finally crested the ridge that overlooked the ranch, Tucker felt Victoria stiffen in his arms. The house was not grand, just a sturdy wooden structure with a wide porch and a barn nearby, but in the afternoon light it looked welcoming. "That is home," Tucker said. "Our home now." They rode down into the valley, and the ranch hands came out to meet them, curious about the new bride. Tucker introduced Victoria to each of them, pleased when she greeted them warmly and without any pretension. These men would be part of their daily life, and it mattered that she could connect with them. Miguel showed Victoria around while Tucker tended to Ranger and the other horses. When Tucker came back to the house, he found Victoria standing in the main room looking around with an expression he could not quite read. "What do you think?" he asked. "It needs a woman's touch," she said diplomatically, "but it has good bones. We can make it beautiful." Over the next weeks, that is exactly what they did. Victoria cleaned and organized, hung curtains she had brought from Tombstone, and added small touches that transformed the austere ranch house into something warmer. She planted flowers in boxes outside the windows and arranged furniture to create cozy spaces for reading or conversation. Tucker watched her transform his space into their space and fell more in love with her every day. In the evenings after the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, Victoria leaning against his chest, his arms around her. "Are you happy?" he asked one night. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Happier than I have been in years. This feels right, Tucker. Like I was always meant to end up here. With me. With you. Because of Thomas bringing us together in a way, but mostly just because of you. You are a good man, Tucker Donovan. Your grandfather would be proud." They made love often in those early weeks, learning each other's bodies and preferences, building intimacy alongside the practical partnership of running a ranch. Victoria took to ranch life more easily than Tucker had expected, helping with meals for the hands, keeping the books, and even learning to ride well enough to accompany him on short trips around the property. 3 months after their wedding, Victoria came to him with news that made his heart race. "I am pregnant," she said, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "I saw the doctor in town yesterday to be sure, He thinks the baby will come in early spring. Tucker swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "A child. Are you happy?" Victoria asked, echoing his question from weeks before. "I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Victoria continued to work on her small dressmaking business, which was growing slowly but steadily as women in the area learned of her skills. She was meticulous about her health, following the doctor's advice and letting Tucker take on more of the physical tasks. Winter came, milder than some but still cold at night. Tucker made sure the house was well stocked with firewood and supplies, worried about Victoria and the baby. She laughed at his fretting but seemed touched by his concern. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she reminded him. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Not my woman carrying my child," Tucker countered. "That makes it different." On a cold March morning, Victoria's water broke, and Tucker rode frantically to town to fetch the doctor and a midwife. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Tucker paced outside the bedroom, listening to Victoria's cries and feeling helpless. Miguel tried to distract him with coffee and conversation, but Tucker could not focus on anything except what was happening behind that closed door. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the wail of an infant. The midwife emerged, tired but smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Donovan. A healthy, strong boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Tucker burst into the room to find Victoria exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was crying lustily, his small fists waving. "Meet your son," Victoria said softly. "Meet Thomas Donovan." Tucker felt his throat close up. "Thomas, after your grandfather, it feels right, like this is how we honor what he lost and what brought us together. Unless you do not like it, I love it," Tucker managed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Can I hold him?" Victoria transferred the baby into his arms, and Tucker looked down at his son, overwhelmed by the wave of love and protectiveness that crashed over him. This tiny person, this perfect combination of him and Victoria, was depending on him for everything. "Hello, Thomas," he whispered. "Welcome to the world. I promise I will do my best by you." The baby quieted at the sound of his voice, and Victoria laughed softly. "He knows you already. He has been hearing you talk to him for months." Little Thomas thrived, growing from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby. Victoria proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving while still maintaining her independence. She set up a cradle in her workroom so she could sew while the baby napped, and she refused to give up the business she was building. "I need this," she explained to Tucker when he suggested she might want to focus solely on Thomas. "I love being a mother, but I also love creating things with my hands. I can do both." Tucker understood, even admired it. His own mother had been strong and independent, and he wanted to raise Thomas to respect women as full people, not just wives and mothers. When Thomas was 6 months old, Victoria came to Tucker with another announcement. "I think I am pregnant again," she said, sounding bemused. "I know it is soon, but my body is giving me all the same signs." This pregnancy was harder than the first. Victoria was exhausted from caring for a young baby while growing another, and Tucker took on more of the childcare duties, learning to change diapers and soothe Thomas when he fussed. The ranch hands pitched in too, with Miguel becoming particularly fond of the baby. Their second child, a daughter they named Clara, was born in the dead of winter. The labor was shorter than Thomas's, but the baby was smaller, more fragile. For a week, Tucker and Victoria barely slept, watching their daughter closely and praying she would gain strength. She did, slowly but steadily, and by the time spring arrived, Clara was a healthy if still tiny baby with Victoria's eyes and Tucker's stubborn chin. Thomas, just over a year old, was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to touch her gently and kiss her forehead. "We have a family," Victoria said one evening as they sat on the porch, Thomas playing at their feet and Clara sleeping in her arms. "A real, beautiful family." "We do," Tucker agreed. "Everything I dreamed of when I found your photograph. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your grandfather had never kept it, if you had never found it? Sometimes. But then I look at you and our children, and I think that somehow we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." The years passed in the way they do when life is full and rich. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved the ranch and followed Tucker everywhere. Clara became a sweet, observant child who seemed to notice everything and had a particular love for the horses. Victoria's dressmaking business flourished, and she eventually took on an apprentice, a young woman from town who showed real talent. Tucker expanded the ranch, buying additional land when a neighbor decided to sell. The cattle herd grew, and the ranch became known for producing quality beef. Miguel, now in his 50s, took on more of a supervisory role, teaching the younger hands the skills they would need. When Thomas was 8 and Clara 6, Victoria told Tucker she was pregnant once more. "I know we said we were done," she said, laughing at his stunned expression. "But apparently our bodies had other ideas." This pregnancy was easier than the previous two, perhaps because Victoria was more experienced and knew what to expect. She gave birth in late summer to another boy, whom they named Joseph. He was a calm baby, content to watch his older siblings play and seeming to absorb the world around him with serious eyes. "3 children," Tucker said, holding Joseph while watching Thomas chase Clara around the yard. "We have been blessed." "We have," Victoria agreed. "Far more than I ever thought possible after losing Thomas Sr. Sometimes I think about that man who came to my shop, the one who lied to me. I wonder who he was and why he did it." "Does it matter now?" "No," Victoria said after a moment. "Not really. Maybe it was meant to happen that way. Maybe we needed to lose each other so you could find me years later. Maybe everything painful that happened was leading us here to this moment." Tucker pulled her close, careful not to jostle the baby. "I like to think you are right. I like to think that love finds a way, even across time and heartbreak." As the children grew, Tucker made sure they knew about their grandfather. He showed Thomas the elder's photograph, the one that matched Victoria's, and told them the story of how he had found Victoria's picture and tracked her down. The children loved the romantic tale, and Clara in particular was fascinated by the idea of photographs as clues to the past. "Did grandfather ever know about me?" little Thomas asked when he was 10. "No," Tucker said honestly. "He died before you were born, but I think he would have loved you. You have his name and his determination." "And his stubbornness," Victoria added with a smile. "You definitely inherited that." The ranch continued to prosper. Tucker hired more hands as the operation grew, and he became known in the territory as a fair employer and skilled rancher. Victoria's reputation as a dressmaker spread, and women came from as far as Tucson to commission pieces from her. She trained several apprentices over the years, finding satisfaction in passing on her skills. When Thomas was 15, he started taking on more responsibility at the ranch, working alongside his father and learning the business. Clara, at 13, showed an interest in her mother's work and began designing her own dress patterns. Joseph, at 7, was still finding his way, interested in books and learning, talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. "They are all so different," Victoria observed one evening. 3 children from the same parents and each one completely unique. That is what makes it interesting, Tucker said, watching them become themselves. The seasons turned, marked by the rhythms of ranch life: spring brandings, summer grazing, fall roundups, winter preparations. Tucker and Victoria grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They still sat on the porch most evenings, still talked about their days and their dreams, still reached for each other in the night. When Tucker turned 45, Miguel threw him a party, inviting half the territory. Tucker was embarrassed by the fuss but touched by the turnout. People came from Fort Bowie and Tombstone and everywhere in between, bringing food and gifts and stories. It was a celebration not just of Tucker but of the life he and Victoria had built. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Victoria pulled Tucker aside. "I have a gift for you," she said, leading him into the house. She brought out a package wrapped in brown paper. Tucker opened it carefully and found a photograph in a beautiful wooden frame. It showed him and Victoria on their wedding day, young and hopeful, looking at each other with obvious love. "I had it taken but never showed you," Victoria explained. "I wanted to wait for the right moment. It seemed fitting on your birthday to give you what your grandfather never got, a photograph of the woman who loves you." Tucker felt tears prick his eyes. "It is perfect. We will hang it in the parlor, right next to the photograph I found in that trunk, the one that started everything." "From his love to ours," Victoria said softly. "That is our story." "That is our story," Tucker agreed, kissing her, "and I would not change a single moment of it." The years continued to unfold. Thomas married a nice girl from town and started his own small ranch on land Tucker helped him buy. Clara married later to a doctor from Tucson, but continued her design work, eventually opening her own shop. Joseph went to college back east, becoming a teacher as he had dreamed, though he always came home for summers. Tucker and Victoria became grandparents, delighting in the next generation while enjoying the slower pace of their later years. Tucker handed over most of the ranch operations to his foreman, content to advise rather than direct. Victoria finally retired from dressmaking, though she still took on special projects for friends and family. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Tucker, now 56 and Victoria 59, stood on the porch they had shared for 3 decades and looked out at the family they had created. "You remember the day I walked into your shop?" Tucker asked. "Every detail," Victoria said. "You were dusty from the road, nervous, holding that photograph like it was made of gold. I thought you were the most earnest man I had ever seen. I was terrified. You were even more beautiful than your photograph, and I had no idea what I was going to say." "You did just fine," Victoria said, leaning into him. "You did more than fine. You gave me back my life, Tucker. You gave me love when I thought I was done with it. You gave me this family, this home, this beautiful, full life." "We gave it to each other," Tucker corrected. "And to my grandfather, in a way. He brought us together, even after death." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tucker and Victoria sat on the porch one more time. The desert air was cool and sweet, filled with the sound of crickets and the distant call of an owl. "I never told you this," Victoria said quietly, "but sometimes I dream about Thomas. Your grandfather, I mean. In the dreams, he is young again, and he tells me he is glad I found happiness. He tells me he is proud of you, of the man you became and the family you built. He tells me to take care of you." Tucker felt a lump form in his throat. "I dream about him too sometimes. He never speaks, just nods at me like he is giving his approval. I like to think he knows somehow, wherever he is, that his love did not die, that it transformed into something new." "Love does not die," Victoria said firmly. "It just changes shape. His love for me became your love for me, and our love made our children, and their love will make their children, on and on. That photograph you found was not just a picture, Tucker. It was a promise that love endures. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the stars. Tucker thought about the strange path that had brought them together, about the trunk in the attic and the photograph that had changed everything. He thought about fate and chance and choice, about all the small decisions that had led to this moment. "Victoria," he said finally, "if you could go back and change things, would you? Would you have given my grandfather a chance to explain, married him instead of me?" Victoria was quiet for a long time, considering. "I cannot answer that honestly without it sounding wrong. If I had married Thomas, I would have loved him and been happy, I think. But I would not have had you, and I would not have had our children, and I cannot imagine a life without them. So no, I would not change it. I would go through the heartbreak again if it meant ending up here with you with this life we have built." "Good," Tucker said, "because I feel the same way. Every hard thing, every painful moment, it all led us here. And here is exactly where I want to be." As they finally went inside to bed, Tucker paused to look at the two photographs hanging in the parlor. His grandfather and Victoria, young and hopeful in 1882. Himself and Victoria, young and in love in 1885. 30 years separated his photograph from this moment, but the love that showed in both pictures was the same, eternal, enduring, true. The following years brought the inevitable challenges of aging. Tucker developed arthritis that made riding difficult, and Victoria's eyesight began to fail, forcing her to give up detailed needlework. But they faced each challenge together, adapting and finding new ways to enjoy life. They spent more time with their grandchildren, telling stories of the old days and passing on family history. Tucker made sure his grandchildren knew about their great-grandfather, about the man whose hidden photograph had started a love story that spanned generations. "Will you tell us again how you found Grandma?" one of Clara's daughters asked one afternoon. Tucker smiled and settled into his chair, Victoria beside him. "Well," he began, "it started with a trunk in an attic and a photograph of the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." As he told the story once more, embellishing details for the children's entertainment, Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. They had told this story dozens of times over the years, and it never got old. It was their origin story, the foundation of everything they had built together. Tucker was 68 when Miguel passed away, a peaceful death in his sleep after a long and good life. The funeral was well attended, and Tucker spoke about his old friend with tears in his eyes. Miguel had been there from the beginning, had supported Tucker's wild quest to find Victoria, had stood up at their wedding and helped raise their children. His loss left a hole that could not be filled. "He was a good man," Victoria said as they stood by Miguel's grave. "He believed in us when we barely believed in ourselves. He knew about love," Tucker said. "He had lost his own wife years before, but he never became bitter. He stayed open to joy, to possibility. That is a rare thing." They stayed in Fort Bowie, despite their children's suggestions that they might want to move closer to town as they aged. The ranch was their home, filled with memories and meaning. Young Thomas, now running the operation himself, made sure his parents were comfortable and cared for. On a spring evening in 1915, 30 years to the day after Tucker had first walked into Victoria's dress shop, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. Tucker was 71, Victoria 74, and they had been married for 30 years exactly. 30 years, Victoria marveled. "It went so fast." "Best 30 years of my life," Tucker said. "Best decision I ever made, getting on that horse and riding to Tombstone." Best decision I ever made, saying yes when you asked me to take a chance." They watched the sun slip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The desert was alive with spring flowers, just as Tucker had promised Victoria it would be all those years ago. Clara's daughter was getting married next month, and they were planning a big celebration. Joseph was coming home from his teaching position for the summer, bringing his wife and their 2 boys. Life was full and good. "Tucker," Victoria said softly, "I need to tell you something." He turned to her, concerned by her tone. "What is it?" "I saw the doctor last week when I was in town. He found something, a growth. He said there is not much that can be done at my age, that I should just enjoy the time I have left." Tucker felt the world tilt. How much time? Months, maybe. He could not say for sure. "I am sorry, my love. I know this is not what you want to hear." Tucker gathered her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks. I wanted to wait until our anniversary to tell you. I wanted one more perfect day before reality intruded." "All our days have been perfect because I spent them with you," Tucker said, his voice breaking. 30 years is not enough. 100 years would not be enough." "I know," Victoria whispered, "but we have had more than many people get. We have had love, Tucker. Real, true, enduring love. That is more valuable than time." The months that followed were bittersweet. Tucker cared for Victoria as her health declined, making sure she was comfortable and surrounded by family. Their children and grandchildren visited often, and the house was filled with love and laughter even as they faced the inevitable. Victoria remained herself until the end, sharp-witted and kind, finding joy in small moments. She made Tucker promise to keep living after she was gone, to not withdraw the way his grandfather had. "Promise me you will stay open," she said during one of her final lucid days. "Promise me you will let our children care for you, that you will enjoy your grandchildren, that you will not spend your remaining years mourning." "I promise," Tucker said, though he could not imagine how he would keep that promise. "But Victoria, I do not know how to exist without you." "You will find a way," she said with certainty. "You are stronger than you know, and I will be with you still, just in a different form. Every sunset, every spring flower, every time you look at those photographs, I will be there." Victoria passed away on a quiet summer morning with Tucker holding her hand and their children gathered around. She slipped away peacefully, and her last words were, "I love you, Tucker Donovan. Thank you for finding me." Tucker grieved deeply but kept his promise. He stayed at the ranch, surrounded by family, and found ways to honor Victoria's memory. He finished a quilt she had been working on, gave it to Clara. He framed some of her dress designs and hung them in the parlor. He told stories about her to the grandchildren, keeping her alive in memory. On the first anniversary of her death, Tucker sat on the porch alone, looking at the sunset and thinking about everything they had shared. He still missed her with an ache that never quite faded, but he could feel her presence too, in the beauty around him and the love of his family. "I found you," he whispered to the evening air. "Your photograph led me to you, and you gave me everything. Thank you, my love. Thank you for saying yes." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of desert flowers, and Tucker could almost hear Victoria's laugh in it. He smiled through his tears and settled back in his chair, content to sit and remember and be grateful for the life they had built from a single photograph and a leap of faith. Tucker lived another 5 years, dying peacefully in his sleep at 76, surrounded by the family he and Victoria had created. His children found him in the morning, and they said he looked peaceful, almost smiling, as though he had gone to meet someone he had been missing. They buried him next to Victoria on a hill overlooking the ranch, and at his request, they placed both photographs with him, the one of young Victoria from his grandfather's trunk and the one from their wedding day. The family gathered to remember a man who had chased a mystery and found love, who had honored his grandfather's memory by living fully and loving completely. Young Thomas, now in his 50s and running the ranch with his own sons, spoke at the funeral about his father's legacy. He taught us that love is worth pursuing, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. He showed us that family is everything, that home is where you make it, and that sometimes the greatest adventures start with the smallest clue. He found a photograph, and he found his destiny. May we all be so brave. The years continued to pass, and the ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The story of Tucker and Victoria became family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. The photographs remained, carefully preserved, a testament to love that transcended time and circumstance. In the parlor of the old ranch house, now modernized but still recognizable, great-great-grandchildren would look at those faded photographs and marvel at the story behind them. An old trunk, a hidden photograph, a cowboy who dared to track down a woman he had never met, and a love that bloomed despite all odds. "Tell us the story again," they would beg their elders, and the story would be told once more. Of Thomas Donovan Sr., who loved and lost. Of Tucker Donovan, who found a photograph and followed it to his future. Of Victoria Sutherland, who had the courage to love again after heartbreak. It was a story of second chances and destiny, of love that refused to die even when separated by death and misunderstanding. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with its hardships and its beauty, but more than that, it was a story of the human heart's capacity to hope, to heal, and to love across any distance, any obstacle, any challenge. The photographs remained, physical proof that some love stories are worth preserving, worth remembering, worth telling again and again. And in Fort Bowie, Arizona, on a ranch that had seen generations come and go, those photographs hung as a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are not gold or land or wealth, but the connections we make, the love we find, and the families we build together. Tucker Donovan had found a photograph in an old trunk, and in finding it, he had found his entire life. He had honored his grandfather's memory, brought closure to a love story that had ended in tragedy, and started a new story that had spanned decades and touched countless lives. That was the true legacy. Not the ranch or the business or the material success, but the love that had started with a sepia-toned image and blossomed into a family tree with roots deep in Arizona soil and branches reaching toward the future. Tucker and Victoria's love story had become part of the land itself, woven into the history of Fort Bowie, a testament to the enduring power of love and the courage it takes to follow your heart into the unknown. And somewhere, perhaps in whatever lies beyond this life, two Donovans and their beloved Victoria were reunited, three souls whose stories had intertwined across time, finally together and at peace, knowing that the love they had each felt had not been in vain. It had created something beautiful, something lasting, something that would continue long after the last photograph faded and the last story was told. Because love, true love, does not end. It transforms, it multiplies, it echoes through generations. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to look at a forgotten photograph and ask, "Who was she?" And then brave enough to find out. That bravery, that curiosity, that willingness to chase a feeling across miles of desert had changed everything, had created everything, had proven that some things are indeed meant to be, and that the heart knows what it needs even when the mind cannot yet comprehend it. The sun set over Fort Bowie one more time, casting golden light across the ranch, the graves on the hill, the old house with its precious photographs. Life continued, as it always does, but the love story of Tucker Donovan and Victoria Sutherland remained, immortal as long as there were people to remember to tell, to believe in the possibility that true love can find you when you least expect it, through the most unlikely means, and change your life forever.